It's great to speak with you again. We talked to you a few weeks ago on the radio side. Tonight we're on the TV side, and it's great to speak with you again. We want to remind our guests to tell us, Kurt, when you were growing up, we like to hear about how our guys got into baseball and maybe the heroes you had before, say, you got to high school.
Well, I was fortunate to grow up in South Florida where baseball was an all-year-round thing.
Right.
It's almost the same way it is here in Southern California where I live now. But, you know, as a kid, it wasn't just all baseball for me like it is nowadays with a lot of kids that are playing baseball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I played everything. So when it was time to put down my baseball glove and trade it for a football helmet, I did that. When it came time to run track and field, we did that. When it was time to play volleyball and basketball, we did that. So, you know, there was a mix of a lot of different sports that I think contributed to one another as far as the players that had some abilities being able to stand out even more. You know, I think the agility on a basketball court, starting and stopping, really helps you as an infielder in baseball. And there's different things. Naturally, track and field is going to help you run better as a baseball player. Football, the cutting, if you're a running back, if you're a wide receiver or a flank and you cut a lot, you know, that could help you round bases and get quick starts and stops in the outfield and things like that. But there's also skills that when you play baseball that can help you with the other sports. Mm-hmm. So I think players nowadays, and I think what I'm leading into, is the fact that kids are missing out by not being able to play a lot of different sports. They're almost being forced to pick one, and that's the way they go, and it's too bad.
Yeah.
But growing up in Miami, Florida, the way I did, I was 4 blocks from Miami Stadium. I loved the game of baseball just as much as any of the sports that I played, if not a little more. And I started going down to Miami Stadium all the time, and I would shag home run balls hit by the players, not only during the International League season, which the Miami Marlins were players that had players like Luke Easter and Satchel Paige back then. But the Baltimore Orioles spring trained down there.
Yes.
And when you look back at those facilities and you think about how immaculate and how excited, I'll never forget the time that I went in there to play for the first time as a professional player. When I was with the Cincinnati Reds, we went down and took a road trip to South Florida to play the Yankees and the Baltimore Orioles. I remember the first time walking on that field as a professional and thinking how special it was. And you see the facilities nowadays that these players have and the teams have in the Arizona area and down in Florida naturally. And it just blows the individual stadium situation away. I mean, it's not even close. The Baltimore Orioles didn't even have a short infield to practice on outside of the regular baseball field that they had within Miami Stadium. There were no indoor cages. All they had was a wheel-in batting cage and some bullpens on each side of the field, and that was it. That's where the Baltimore Orioles spring trained for years and years and years. And now it's just completely changed. So the players have such pluses nowadays that when I look back on my youth, as much as I loved it and as much as I wouldn't trade it for the world, it'd kind of be fun to be able to go back in time and put myself in the situation that these players nowadays are in.
Oh, it would. And you and I had talked a few weeks ago about that very same thing. And, you know, what impressed me about you, too, and staying on that whole all-around athlete situation, Kurt, you played almost every position except catcher and pitch in the major leagues, and obviously that contributed to staying around 15 years. So it was just a natural progression. You were such a good athlete, all-around athlete, and you could play every position also.
Being able to move around and play different positions certainly helped.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the one thing that I had, and certainly other players have it, not only today but also back in the day when I played, that kept me around the most was the desire and determination. You know, there were a lot of abilities that I lacked, but I wanted to be a better player. I wanted to play at the major league level, and I think that determination kept me up for, you know, at least a few years.
Mm. And again, for our viewers out there, Kurt played in close to 1,000 games over that 15-year stretch with 6 different teams. Again, one of his highlights was hitting 2 home runs in that '84 World Series, hitting .412 as the DH for the Padres at the time. Tony, questions for Kurt?
And Kurt, good evening. It's a pleasure to have you. And I remember you coming up as a very young scholastic player in 1971 with Cleveland, and you were signed with the Mets. And I just wanted to know the sensation you had going to play with the Indians. You know, that big, huge stadium off the lake, and that it must have been cold as anything. And what's it like to get to the big leagues in Cleveland?
I'm not too sure if the folks in Cleveland want to hear that. I gotta tell you, it was miserable. with the exception of being excited as a young kid could ever be. Getting out of the cab in front of Fenway Park with all I owned in 2 hands. And trying to get into the stadium because the gates had already opened. And I had flown in that day. And when I got to the clubhouse, which took some doing because they didn't know who I was from Adam. And nobody sent out any alarm. You know, nobody was meeting me at the gate. Nobody met me at the airport. It was all me. And that's the way it was back then. It was all the player. The club bought the ticket. That was it. You knew where to go. You were supposed to be there at a certain time, and it was you that had to get there. Mm-hmm. So when I got there, I mean, I could have stayed out on the street in front of the ballpark for a long time. What is it, Lombard Street?
Yeah, that's one of them.
You know, that time was so exciting. And I remember going into the clubhouse, and there wasn't a soul in there except for the clubhouse guy. And he said, "Your locker's there, kid." And I walked over to my locker, and he says, "You need to get dressed and get out and take some pregame practice if you can." The skipper was talking about getting you out there as quickly as possible. The manager's Alvin Dark. Mm-hmm. So I'm sitting there, and I'm trying to get on Ken Harrelson's pants. Now, Ken Harrelson's a big man.
Yeah.
Ken Harrelson's 6'3", and weighs 215. I was 6'2" and weighed about 185, maybe 190. I could not get his pants on. To this day, I don't know how he did it. I couldn't get his pants on. And it's not because I have a big A either. I don't, you know, my legs might be a little bigger than Hawk's.
That's bizarre.
But I came to understand that when he got his uniforms in spring training, he would take them to his tailor.
Oh.
And he would get them cut to where they were perfect for Hawk Harrelson. And getting to meet Hawk and know him in the years after, I mean, I didn't know who Hawk Harrelson was at that time. I really didn't. Yeah. And getting to know him and the kind of person that he was, you know, we had quite a few laughs throughout the years when we talk about that happening. So they had to switch pants for me. But the next thing I got somebody tap me on the shoulder, and it's Alvin Dark. He said, "Kid, you need to go out there and take some hacks. You're in the lineup tonight." So he literally walked out of the clubhouse with me, up the dugout steps, onto the field, and Chris Chambliss and Greg Nettles and Ray Fosse, and I think it was Eddie Leone was the group that was hitting at the time. He goes, "Hey, guys, get out of there. Kid's hitting." I went, "Oh, man. This is not good."
Like parting the sea.
You know, he shuffled all the veterans out of the batting cage to let me take a couple of swings.
Wow.
And I played my first major league game that night. The next game we had a doubleheader against the Red Sox, and I played all the games and played every game while Alvin was the manager, and the next thing you know, he gets fired.
Yeah.
So that was the first time in my career I found out that what people say to you is not necessarily true. Because the guy that took his place was Ken Aspermani. And Ken Aspermani was my manager in Wichita, where I went for a month before I got called up from Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to tell you, I ripped the cover off the ball in Wichita. The first night there, I went 5 for 5. And Ken Aspermani just raved about me. He talked about not even there being a doubt that I was going to get called up to the big leagues. It was just a matter of how much playing time that I was going to get. When he took over as manager, my butt was on the bench. It was unbelievable.
That's crazy.
So from that point on, I didn't believe anything I heard in the game.
Yeah.
And I learned that at a young age.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So that was, that was fun. But then when we got back to Cleveland, and everybody knows the mistake on the lake jokes and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, downtown Cleveland just was not a pretty place.
Yeah.
It just wasn't. That's all there is to it. And that's where the ballpark was. I lived in a small suburb called Berea, and it wasn't very far from downtown. And I really don't remember much about, you know, what I did outside of the games. All I know is I think I ate almost every meal at the Sheraton Hotel downtown. Because it was close to the ballpark, it was where the visiting team stayed, and it just seemed like it was easy.
Yeah. Wow. It's and you find your way to Kansas City. Now, how did that happen? And was Kansas City better to you than Cleveland was? I hope so.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Kansas City. It was a godsend, really. I mean, it was the first year that I played for Jack McKeon. I got traded for Mike Hedlund, and
Former guest.
you know, Cleveland needed some pitching. Kansas City needed a utility type of player, an extra man, and also a guy that could potentially play some third base. And that's basically the role that I filled in Kansas City. I played a little bit of second, a little third. I played short a couple of times. I played in the outfield. Played very little first because we had John Mayberry there. And I had a great time in Kansas City. It was I did well. I got an opportunity to play. Jack put me in the lineup. I think he knew the kind of player that I was. He knew that I was the kind of guy that kind of rose to the occasion in certain situations. And it was a good deal. It was a good marriage between Jack and I. And he ended up acquiring me and trading me away 4 different times. And you know what? It would have been 5 if when I was released by Seattle in their expansion year, the day before they broke camp to go north, I got released. And I led the club in home runs and hitting that spring.
Yeah, we read that.
Yeah, it was nuts, and the reason was crazy. I mean, there was a huge 3 or 4 page article written about that when I came back into town with the Texas Rangers. But I was really left on the street corner. That was the first time in my career where I didn't know whether I was going to play anymore. Because it was the last day of spring training, all rosters are set, everybody sat, unless you're a star, and stars don't get released the last day of spring training.
Right.
It's very hard to catch on with the club, but I called Jack McKeon, who was in Oakland. And he goes, let me call Charlie. I'll get right back to you. He calls me back about 10 minutes later, and he goes, Charlie says you're making too much money. So, can I tell you what my contract called for that year?
Sure.
You're welcome to.
$27,500.
Too much. Huh?
The building's shaking.
You want to know when that was? That was 1977.
Yeah. That's insane. And
Yeah.
the whole Seattle thing, and you had told me on the other show, Kurt, about that experience. It was not a good experience. Didn't you tell me your wife at the time was house shopping and got the word? It was terrible. Just an awful
Hey, you remember that. That's good memory.
Yeah.
Good memory. Yeah, I was mad. I was upset with Veda Pinson for a long time.
That's right. Yeah.
Because he was on the coaching staff. Him and I were teammates in Kansas City. And he knew something was up. And he also knew that my wife was going to drive north and start looking for, she was going to visit her mom in Marin County and driving from Arizona up in the San Francisco area, and then continue up to Seattle and look for a place to live. So she had left about 4 or 5 days before. This decision was already made because of Danny Kaye, who was the owner at the time.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what the decision was and why it was made, but the fact remains is that Veda could have came to me and said, Kurt, maybe you better wait, something's up. I can't tell you what it is, but tell your wife not to leave yet.
Yeah, that would have.
I might have thought that I was going to get traded or something like that.
Sure.
I ended up in Plant City, Florida. I don't know if this was part of the story that I told you, but here I have been in the big leagues since 1971.
Right.
All the way up until 1970. This was the spring of 77. And all of a sudden, I find myself in Plant City, Florida, in the minor league complex of the Texas Rangers.
Yeah.
Because I had called Rich Donnelly, and Rich Donnelly was the manager of the Tucson Toros, which was the AAA affiliated Texas Rangers at the time. And we had played against him, and I had done really well. And him and I would kind of chat because I was playing third. He was the third base coach for the other team. And the Rangers signed me. That was the best thing that ever happened to me. That release by Seattle and getting signed by the Rangers turned out to be the best thing that happened in my career.
And you
because I went through spring training, went down to Plant City, by the way, got into my room. There was no phone. There was a bed and one pillow. It was like I stepped back in time.
Yeah.
So I walked up to the front desk and I go, I need a phone in my room. And they go, no, the players aren't allowed to have phones.
Huh?
I go, no, that ain't going to work. I go, I've got a wife, I've got kids, I need a phone. There weren't any cell phones back then.
Right.
No.
So I ended up getting a phone, but evidently some of the players had jumped town on some of the phone bills the years before. So they outlawed having any phones in any of the players' rooms in the minor leagues.
Jeez.
So I got through that. I don't even remember much past the first day of getting there. And being as down in the dumps as you could possibly be.
Yeah.
But we, I went to play in Tucson and just tore it up.
Yeah.
Just tore it up. My stats for that whole year, from playing winter ball, where I played for the Mayagüez Indios in Puerto Rico, where we won the Caribbean Series. That's the World Series of Caribbean baseball, for those who don't know.
Yeah.
To having the stats that I had in spring training with Seattle, and then going to Tucson, and having the statistics that I had there, and then going up to Texas and hitting 330 the remainder of the year.
Yeah. Yeah, that was
It was one heck of a year, and it really set me straight almost for the rest of my career. Not necessarily having a long-term contract or anything like that, but I actually worked the remaining 9 years of my career all on multi-year contracts after that.
Well, somebody was watching, and you're right, Kurt. I mean, those 2 years in Texas, your best power numbers, those were actually two good teams, 77 and 78. It was a coaching carousel at the time.
Yeah, a lot of managers.
A lot of managers at the time.
Why was that?
You had 17, we counted 17 managers over 15 years, Kurt. We probably missed one or two, but that is just an amazing thing to have to deal with. But obviously, the Texas did agree with you. The heat down there, I think we talked to it on the other show. It was kind of brutal at times. You had some stories about the heat in Texas also.
You know, I think that's a reason why Texas hasn't won a lot. I mean, that heat will beat you up. But when I went to Texas, the manager was Billy Hunter. The reason I say this is because Billy Hunter was the third base coach for the Baltimore Orioles when I was bat boy.
Way back, yeah.
Yeah. He was a player, and then he became a coach.
Yeah.
So Billy Hunter used to hit me ground balls to Louis Aparicio and Brooks Robinson.
Jeez.
It was, it was kind of like old home week. I mean, he didn't remember, but when I started to talk to him about it, things became quite interesting. And Billy really gave me a lot of opportunities in Texas that I'm grateful for. And Brad Corbett, who was the owner then, he was a man of his word. If you've got time for a quick story.
Sure.
After that 77 year, I told my wife, I said, I'm not leaving this town until I talk to Brad Corbett about a contract for next year. So Brad Corbett was having a birthday party at the Country Club of Dallas just a couple of days after the season ended. And I said, we're staying at least that long. And I'm going to go over there and talk to him to his birthday party and talk to him about my contract. Did that. Waited around the whole night. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. Brad Corbett got absolutely hammered. And I never got a chance to talk to him until he was walking out the front door with his son. And he puts his arm around me and he goes, come on, let's take a ride. I want to show you my new house. And we'll talk about your contract. So I go get in the car with this guy. And we drove to this place that he was going to build a new house, and his other house, which he lived in, was very close to there. So we literally went to Brad Corbett's house. It was 2:30 in the morning. And we talked about my contract. And we agreed on a 3-year contract for more money than I ever thought I'd make in a game, even though it really wasn't a whole hell of a lot. But it was more than Babe Ruth made.
Yeah.
And when things like that happen to a kid growing up in Miami that loved the New York Yankees and that loved the game of baseball, it's pretty special. So I went to Puerto Rico. I agree with that contract with him. When I left Brad Corbett's house that night, he had passed out on his sink in his kitchen. And I walked out the front door. I don't even remember how I got back to my house in Arlington because I drove with him. And to this day, I can't remember how I got back, either to Dallas Country Club or to my house. I'm sure I had a car somewhere, but I don't remember. So I went to Puerto Rico, and it's a baseball rule that clubs must send contract renewals or contracts to players by a certain date. Or else the player becomes a free agent and all of that stuff, right? So I got my certified letter down in Puerto Rico in San Juan like I usually did. And my contract was for $45,000, 1-year deal.
1 year.
Which was $60,000 less than we had agreed on.
Wow.
For the first year. And there were also clauses in it for games played and all of that stuff that we talked about. So I called up Dan O'Brien, who's the general manager, and he goes, "Don't worry about it. We got the contract to you. We'll talk about it the first day of spring training." So with spring training, Pompano Beach, after winning the Caribbean Series, I didn't have a lot of time. I went and saw my folks in Miami and just drove up the street to Fort Lauderdale, Pompano Beach area where Texas is spring training. And the next day, got up, went to the ballpark, went to Dan O'Brien's office, which was down in a mobile home down the left field line, and he goes, "Let me go out and talk to Brad." Brad's standing right on the left field line with Billy Hunter. He goes, and I see them talking. This goes on for like 10 minutes. And I see Brad shaking his head, and I'm going, "Oh, you got to be kidding me." I see Billy Hunter shaking his head, and I'm going, "Oh, no. Why are they talking about my contract in front of the manager?"
Oh.
So Dan O'Brien comes back into the mobile home, which was nice, by the way, but it was his office. And he goes, "Brad doesn't remember that night at his house." He goes, "But whatever he said, whatever you said he agreed to, that's the deal."
Wow.
Wow.
That was exactly what he said.
So they tore it up, and that was your new contract, Kurt.
It was. And
Wow.
the other thing was there were certain performance clauses in there which would have brought it up like another $5,000 to maybe $15,000 a year, which was a lot of money back then.
Sure.
And the reason Billy Hunter was shaking his head was that he didn't want to know anything about performance contracts or performance parts of the contract.
Sure,
Or in other words, if I got 250 ABs, I got a $10,000 bonus.
Yeah.
Billy Hunter doesn't want to look on the bench and see me with the game left with 249 at bats.
Yeah, that's true.
So Brad said, just put that in the contract.
Wow.
It's not a performance clause anymore. It's just part of the deal.
Wow.
So you wonder why players stay where they are and maybe sign for a little less and don't want to leave a town in certain situations. And I think Tony Gwynn is a perfect example of that here in San Diego.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of reasons that players will do that, because they were treated right.
And I want to, before we let you go, Kurt, I want to fast forward to that '84 season. You find yourself in San Diego for a few years. That makes up for all the bad weather you had in Texas. You're in San Diego toward the end of your career. But '84 World Series, here you are, Dick Williams, and you told us on the other side, you said that guy, you always be indebted to him because he showed confidence in you that was incredible, and obviously it paid off. That World Series was magical.
Well, that World Series really defined my career.
Sure.
Because it proved to people that I was the kind of player that's going to rise to the occasion. And it had been talked about in very small circles before that. But I believed in myself, and there were a lot of people within the game that believed in me. And I think that's one of the reasons that I lasted as long as I did. Pat Corrales, who was a major league manager, a coach for a long time under Bobby Cox in Atlanta, and really was a catcher in the Reds organization when I first broke in.
Yes.
He said something about me one time that, one of the reasons that players gain confidence is not only performance, but also what other people say about them. Because then all of a sudden you think you're good.
Yeah.
And if you think you're good, you are.
Yeah. Interesting.
So we've all heard about how much of the mental game is important. Well, it sure is. But Pat Corrales once said, and I'll try to quote, but I might mess it up a little bit.
Oh, that's okay.
He said, Kurt Bevacqua doesn't hit when he wants to. He hits when he has to.
Yeah, sure.
And it's going back to all the spring trainings that I remember being in, where I probably went into camp as the 24th through the 26th, 27th guy, and I needed to perform. And I think me playing winter ball, and also the fact that I really believed in myself, really made for that situation to where, you know, I made ball clubs that maybe normally I wouldn't have made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I credit Pat Corrales. Thank you, Pat, if you're listening.
Yeah. God bless you, Pat, wherever you are. Tony?
And Kurt, you know, one thing I do want to ask you, because I don't think there's a lot of people know that Jerry Coleman at one point was a manager, and the fact that you had played under him, was Jerry a good manager, or was Jerry better off in the broadcast booth?
Oh, Jerry was terrible.
There you go.
But you know what? He was one of those guys that, you know what? He was just too far removed from the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When he became the manager of the Padres in 1980. And, I mean, he used to do some silly things. But he was the greatest of guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's really why it was hard to get mad at him, although Gene Tennis and Raleigh Fingers couldn't stand him. It certainly wasn't because Jerry isn't Jerry, because he was just a great man. You know, he was just such an addition to the game of baseball, and also the San Diego Padre organization, and New York Yankees also. I mean, Jerry was a pretty good player.
He sure was.
And although a lot of people talk about him being in the war and in his broadcasting career, Jerry was a good baseball player in a time where there were a lot of good baseball players that were roaming through minor league systems, just itching to get on rosters somewhere above where they were. And Jerry always seemed to hold on to his position and played the start on a New York Yankee team that that had some really good players on them. But yeah, Jerry, that year, that was one of the years Jack Pekian traded me from here. Jerry used me primarily as a pinch hitter. And I used to go into his office, and not all the time because I was gone in July, right before the trading deadline. The Pirates needed a third baseman, and I went over there and played some third for the Pirates and some other positions with them. But you know, I was hitting about 470 pinch hitting. I said, Jerry, why do I not play? I go, I get a pinch hit every time you put me up there. And he goes, exactly. And he goes, if I played you, you'd probably hit third through sixth somewhere in the lineup. And I'd probably have to pick a spot, and that's where you'd hit. So let's say you hit fifth. Now, what are the chances that you're going to come up in a game situation if you're in one spot in the lineup? He goes, chances are slim. He goes, but if I've got you next to me on the bench, he goes, I can put you up in any situation in the game. I go, Jerry, oh, man. Well, that analogy is killing me. I go, but I guess it's good. If you say so, it's good. So Jerry was a great guy. He really was. He's missed, and I'm sure even Gene Tennis and Raleigh Fingers miss him.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a lovable guy. That's for sure.
He was. He really was.
Yeah, he really was. Everyone talks the same good thoughts about him. Kurt, we're about out of time here. We only scratched the surface, as is normal for a guy that played 15 years. I'm sure we'll talk to you maybe on the other side again. We always,
I hope so.
We always enjoyed speaking with you.
It's been a pleasure,
We'll
Kurt.
get
Thank
into
you
it
so
more
much.
next time, what you're doing these days and everything, but we appreciate the time tonight, and good luck, sir.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and good job, guys.
Well, you too.
Thank you. You too.
Good night, Kurt. Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon.
You
Bye.
too.
Bye.
Former Major Leaguer Kurt Bevacqua.